If you are a perfectionist, do you know how you respond when you feel stressed or overwhelmed? Are you able to recognize it and adapt and pivot and change your course of action? It is particularly important for perfectionists to be aware of their stress signs because perfectionists, maybe more than some other folks, want to avoid that feeling of stress. That is what perfectionism is all about in some ways, is avoiding uncomfortable feelings such as failure. But stress fits that bill as well. So that's what I want to talk about today is perfectionism and how you respond when you're feeling stressed and how to recognize that and what a little bit of what to do about that. I'm Dr. Kit Sly's life coach and licensed psychologist, here to inspire perfectionists and anxious achievers to feel calm and confident while holding clear boundaries. And so today I'll review just a little bit about what perfectionism is, and we'll go through some potential early warning signs of how you can notice when you're stressed out by trying to control your environment more than what's normal for you. And then we'll talk about some shifts in thinking and perspectives to be aware of in these moments. So, the reason I thought about making this video today, you might have noticed that it's been a few weeks since I posted a video. And the reason for that is just life has been busy. We've been sick. It's just there hasn't been a good moment. And there was a time when my perfectionism would have reared its big ugly head, and it would have been a big friggin' deal for me to not have posted videos for this long because I've set a goal for myself to post some regular videos, right? And so perfectionists create these high, unrealistic expectations of themselves. And when they don't get there, oh, it doesn't feel good. And the outcomes can be difficult, right? So I want to review a little bit about what perfectionism is. Um, and that example highlights it a little bit, but it's important, I think, keep in mind that there's two sides of a coin with perfectionism, right? There's a positive or adaptive perfectionism, and there's a maladaptive or a negative side to perfectionism. When we're talking about the positive side, that's less of what I'm talking about here. And what I mean by that is that, of course, if you are perfectionistic, you might achieve a lot and do really great things because you set high goals for yourself. And we know just from research that when we set goals, people achieve more when they set goals, regardless of how they go about them. They might not even achieve their goal, but they are going to accomplish more if they set them. So, the positive side of perfectionism and an adaptive version of it is focusing on those positive outcomes, but having some flexibility around those goals, right? Acknowledging your strengths and positive outcomes. The maladaptive side to perfectionism is being driven by fear of not being able to achieve those unrealistic expectations as opposed to realistic goals, and being overly self-critical on oneself as a way to motivate, or as a way you think you're motivating yourself. It doesn't actually usually motivate. It usually leads to things like procrastination. Um, but it's that fear-driven, maybe low self-esteem or just negative self-talk in moments of stress and strain, particularly, right? So there's that old thing where people, like in the job interview, oh, what are your strengths here? Oh, I'm a perfectionist, and that's my strength and weakness too, right? And the reality is that the way that we value perfectionism in our society ends up turning into that maladaptive side of you've got to be on at all times, overwork yourself, and create these unrealistic expectations, and that you don't have value or something like that if you don't achieve these unrealistic expectations, which is pretty crummy if you think about it, especially when you compare it to the thought of, hey, let's set some goals that are realistic and work towards them, and we'll be okay if we don't get there. We will still have made more progress along the way, and we can potentially still achieve that goal, just maybe on a different timeline, right? Very different flavors. So the perfectionism we're talking about is that maladaptive, that sort of all or nothing thinking is another way to think of it, of like, I am not a success unless I achieve this thing up here, versus like, no, I can achieve down here and still be successful because I've done everything it took to get to this point. That is successful, right? That is maybe a gray area as opposed to an all or nothing thinking. So with that unrealistic expectations being driven by a fear of failure, the maladaptive perfectionism leads to a tendency to want to control one's environment. And I apologize for the dogs barking in the background. Um, so perfectionists want to control their environment. And what happens is, the reason this is maladaptive, or can be, is that when things get out of control, it leads to an unnecessary level of stress when they feel that they can't control. Because if you think about it, controlling one's environment, I mean, that's a good feeling if you've got the control, right? That's feels powerful. It's like, hey, look at me, look at all I can do, look at all these great outcomes that I'm getting as a result of the control that I'm asserting on my environment. I've got my schedule, I've got all the things I'm doing. I'm making sure this person does that, I'm making sure I do that. I mean, there's a lot of power in that potentially, and potentially feeling good about that. But the maladaptive piece comes where if that isn't happening perfectly, the person is going to that all or nothing of like, oh, I am nothing because I've lost control over this little tiny thing. When in reality, it's like, no, losing some control, it's okay. You are still worthy. You're still a good person. If you don't have control over everything, you can still achieve things, right? And so the control the perfectionists assert, it's all about avoiding those uncomfortable emotions or that fear of failure. It's all about avoiding the failure or any stress or discomfort that might come with how they define failure. Perfectionists, if you think about it, they might not acknowledge when they are stressed, when things are getting a little bit out of balance, out of control, a little bit, because that would threaten to topple all of their spinning plates. When in reality, it's like, well, maybe one plate has slowed down or we took one plate off, but there's all these other plates that are still spinning just fine. Okay. So the perfectionist might not want to acknowledge when they're feeling stressed. It is important, though, to learn to do that so that you can be more proactive, and also practice a little bit of what we would call distress tolerance, tolerating that uncomfortable feeling a little bit so that we can be okay with it and not let it topple all of our spinning plates. So today, what I want you to think about is some ways that if you are a perfectionist, or if you just are somebody who tends to cope with trying to control things, and um everything topples when you lose a little bit of that control. Okay, what I want you to think about is ways that you might subtly start to control other things in your environment that you don't do normally, that um are a trigger that you're getting stressed out. Or the other thing we're also going to be looking at is maybe you start to avoid situations where you might lack control, so you can avoid the feeling of not having control. And these could be early signs that you're stressed and are actually a sign that you need to let go of more control or the outcomes a little bit. So one sign that we are trying to control things more, sometimes worry can be a sign that we're trying to control. Um, you know, when we worry, it feels like we have more control over the situation in some ways because we're thinking about it and we're thinking about all the outcomes and all of this. And there's a time and a place for worry, right? But if you're noticing yourself worrying more than what's normal for you, or really focus on lots of details of a situation, you get to question if you are trying to assert more control, because we can't worry about something enough to change anything or control it, right? So another sign that you're trying to control things, maybe subtly, is just spending more time than what's necessary on literally anything. It could be a project that you're working on. It could be your appearance. Maybe spending more time on like picking an outfit and feeling like you have to have that perfect outfit or something like that. Um, Focusing on unnecessary details and avoiding doing actual work. This is a version of procrastination. So you might be feeling like, okay, if I can control these details, I will maintain my control of my universe and everything will be okay, right? When in reality, there's some discomfort maybe in the actual work that needs to get done, or that would serve you better if you did get done, we should say. Um, and that feels uncomfortable. And so you're asserting your control by focusing on all these other details. Um, and procrastination itself, if you procrastinate in other ways, that can also be a sign that either you're trying to control something or again, trying to avoid the feeling of something uncomfortable, like avoiding the potential for failure if you do follow through on this task, right? Food might be another area where we tend to control ourselves or our environment. This it can lead to eating disorders in some folks. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about just more of a subclinical unhealthy relationship with food. Maybe you try to plan out your meals even more, or maybe you will go the opposite and overeat and feel like you've lost control in that area. But what we're talking about today, I think, is if you are feeling like, oh my gosh, I've got to really control every little morsel, or just really, I've got to have my week planned out and things aren't going to go well if I don't have that planned out. You might do that with your schedule too. You might, even if your schedule serves you in adaptive ways at times, you might start to micromanage your schedule or somebody else's and try to plan down every little minute detail, trying to hold on to the thread of control, right? When in reality, life happens and sometimes our schedule doesn't go as planned anyways. Other ways that might be some early signs for you is of just avoiding really anything, avoiding people that you normally connect with, avoiding new experiences. And the reason for this is you might be trying to control your environment and your interactions, or again, trying to avoid maybe a feeling that might come up for you, an uncomfortable feeling in those moments. So these are just some examples of subtle ways that could be an early sign that you feel like you're getting stressed out and things aren't working out as planned, and you could be going to that place of burnout or uh, giving up completely on a project. Okay, so at this point, if you're noticing these things with yourself, first of all, just take a breath, right? The earth is still rotating, the sun is still rising. Let's focus on the bigger picture. You can do that by asking yourself questions like, how much is all this going to matter in 5 years from now if I don't reach this goal perfectly or something like that, right? Focus on the bigger picture. Focus on the forest, not the trees. Consider if you need to adjust any expectations you have about outcomes. Try to identify, is there all or nothing thinking in the outcomes that you're thinking about, and replace that with a more realistic thought like, okay, if I don't get to point A at this particular point in time, the worst case scenario, life will still go on. Maybe I can still get there. I can still cope with it. It's not going to be the end of the world. So identify your early signs that you are stressed and think for yourself, what are your own signs? What are other signs for yourself? Changes in behaviors, changes in thinking, just changes in the way that you're showing up. Any change that you're noticing in yourself. Just check in with yourself. What's going on? Am I stressed right now? Let's breathe, create some downtime, shift your perspective, look at the bigger picture, and try to replace unrealistic expectations with more realistic, balanced thoughts about what is achievable. Remind yourself that you are still a success. You have done so much in your life already to get here, and that is worth so much. And you will continue to do that work even if things don't work out perfectly for you. So that, my friends, is a reminder of some things about perfectionism and how control can manifest. And I hope that you found it helpful, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Bye for now.